Hello, and welcome to another meeting of the Lotus Council. So what we have for you today is a budget modern deck. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, it's budget. It's going to cost, $100, $150, $200. A lot of people will say that as budget, but I tried to make every card in this be $1.50 or less. So we'll go through and we'll talk about that and what that means. So first thing we're going to talk about are the mana reducers, and then I'll explain kind of the cost of the deck and some upgrades. So the mana reducers, I have a playset of Goblin Arcanomancer. So Gruul, and each spell you cast that's red or green costs one less to cast. Not bad for a 2/2 body. And then I have Bard class. This is really important for legendary creatures, and we'll talk about it here a bit more in a bit. So legendary creatures enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter. Not bad for Gruul. And then to level it up to 2 for Gruul, legendary spells you cast cost Gruul less to cast. So it only impacts the colored mana, it doesn't apply to the mana that is not colored. So we'll talk about some of the utility creatures that we have in here and what I'm trying to do. Curd Ape. So for budget Gruul decks, especially modern, this is a staple. Of course, I'm using the revised art because I just love that art. I mean, gorilla with red eyes. How could you not? So for 1, you do get a 1/1 unless you have a forest. And then it's a 2/3. So I have a playset of that. Pretty strong creature. I have a playset of Gruul Spellbreaker. So Gruul in 1 for a 3/3 with Riot and Trample. So if you're not familiar with Riot, each creature enters the battlefield with either a +1/+1 counter or haste. Talk about why you're going to be choosing that counter. And of course, Bone Crusher Giant with the Goblin Arcanomancer, you're basically getting a shock that makes it so people can't prevent combat damage. And red and 1 for a 4/3 that basically can target people. So staple of burn decks, pretty budget friendly. It's included. Now, the other major creatures that we have a playset each of Helana and Elena Partners and Reckless Stormseeker. So if you remember me talking about this in another deck tech for Standard, I love this combo. Both of these are really budget friendly. For some reason, Helana and Elena is like 50 cents right now. I don't know why. Reckless Stormseeker, on the other hand, is kind of creeping up a bit. So basically, at the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. Use this to pump Helana and Elena. So first strike and reach. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put X +1/+1 counters on another target creature you control, where X is Helana and Elena's power. That creature gains haste. So basically pumping this up by 1, you're then putting 3, but if you've done Bard class first, this is coming in as a 3/4, then it's a 4/4, putting 4 counters. So that's why you would want to use the +1/+1 counter as Riot. So basically getting a 7/7 or 8/8 depending on Helana and Elena's power, especially with that Bard class out, with Trample and Haste. This is a fast-paced deck. So let's talk about the spells real quick. And you're going to see a pattern here. So Domri's Ambush, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. That creature then deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. So nice removal, plus that +1/+1 counter that you could end up putting on Helana and Elena. Then we've got the duality, so Giant Growth and Brute Force. So each of these cost 1 mana, either green or red, and target creature gains +3/+3 till end of turn. Can you guess which creature we would be giving +3/+3 to? Yeah, Helana and Elena. Now, one thing this deck doesn't have that I had trouble finding a spot for is Snakeskin Veil. That would probably something that I would put in, maybe take out in the main board. I would take out maybe those and have just one of each, or maybe a couple of the Domri's Ambushes. I still haven't quite figured out how to slot that in, but it's a budget card. It is very, very budget friendly. Then in the sideboard, Savage Smash, of course, giving creature +2/+2 till end of turn and making it fight. Then 4 copies of Torbrand. So you might notice a pattern with the creatures. They all contain red. So I debated having Torbrand in because if a red source would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent they control, it deals that much +2 instead. And then with the Bard class, this is going to cost 1 red less. With Arcanomancer, 1 colorless less. So it would basically be double red for a 2/4 that's doing damage as if it were 4/4, but it's also going to be getting a counter, so really 3, 5 plus an additional 2, broken. Then I have a Braid, which is pretty good removal. I didn't include Lightning Bolt. It was a bit out of the budget, but that would be one of the things you would slot in here. Then another copy of Brute Force and Giant Growth, and 4 copies of Experiment 1. This does get counters on it, and you can remove counters to regenerate it. Likely, that would be one of the targets for taking out Bolt. We'll talk about upgrades here in a minute. So it comes with 4 copies of Game Trail. It's pretty decent. You have to reveal either a mountain or forest, but it is just a land. Then we have Cinderglade, which is a mountain forest. It's going to trigger Curd Ape. So you have one of these out, play Curd Ape, it's a 2/3. Really good value. And then finish it out with mountains and forests. So what about upgrades? So about $30 for the deck at the time I put it together. Some of the cards are moving up. The others are pretty stable. Bard class is one that's increasing in price. Reckless Stormseeker is. Lana and Elena isn't, really. It's about 50 cents last I checked. And then, of course, Game Trail is right at the edge of the budget. So that might be a little bit over now. Essentially, I was trying to get a nice budget dual land. And really, Cinderglade is the only good budget dual land. I wouldn't consider tap lands a good budget choice, especially when you're trying to have a fast-paced deck like this. So what are some things that you would want to include? Well, one of the big things, play set of Stomping Ground. So Game Trail out, Stomping Ground in. That's going to be the first one. And then I would put in a play set of Rockfall Vales, maybe taking out some forests and mountains. Really trying to bump that because I love these slow lands because they're really not that slow by either turn 1 it comes in tapped or turn 2 it's tapped, and then after that it's untapped if you're hitting your land drops. Other things I would really like to potentially include that are things, I would definitely include a playset of Rhythm of the Wild. So it makes it so your creature spells can't be countered, and non-token creatures you control have Riot when they enter, so they're getting an additional +1/+1 counter. So that's going to include Helana and Elena, which is a big deal. Then you have potentially Werewolf Pack Leader, so you're drawing cards. Really, really good card. Dropping a little bit in price, but, still pretty well out. Then Questing Beast. This one is definitely out of the budget. But, I mean, its word text is, a paragraph. So it has Vigilance, Death Touch, Haste, and cannot be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Can't chump block it. So combat damage that would be dealt by creatures you control can't be prevented, and whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much opponent to target planeswalker that player controls. So it gets rid of the pesky planeswalkers. So 2 green and 2 for a 4/4 with all of that. Bard class Arcanomancer, so basically making it down to 1 potentially. 1 green and 1 colorless. Super broken in this type of a deck. And so the idea is I'm trying to put in things with haste. Then the other is Cemetery Prowler. I definitely would take out the Experiment 1 and figure out a way to slot this into the main deck. So 2 green and 1 for a 3/4 wolf with Vigilance, and whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, exile a card from a graveyard. So spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each card type they share with cards exiled with Cemetery Prowler. that's also going to make the spells cheaper. So definitely want to run that. And then the last thing, you really need a great henge if you're doing this kind of a deck. So it's going to cost X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. And if you remember me talking about what could potentially happen with creatures with Riot, this is going to come in very cheap. So you add 2 green, gain 2 life, and whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. So we're all about putting counters on the cards. And then, of course, the last thing that I mentioned, definitely would want to slot a Snake Veil in there. Let me pull out a copy of that real quick to give you an idea what that looks like. So Snakeskin Veil, it's 1 green to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control and give it hexproof until end of turn. So definitely I'd want that in there somewhere. Just at the time, I wasn't really able to find a way to include it very easily. So kind of the things I would do to improve it. And of course, adding in all of these upgrades, I mean, Great Henge is like, what, 50, 60 bucks right now? Definitely not budget friendly. But the idea is you could build the deck and then through trades or whatever, upgrade it. So Stomping Ground is actually, when it comes to the shocks, it's not too bad. It's, I think, around $9 to $10. And you can also sacrifice Condition for cheapness, essentially. The slow lands, they're between 3 to 5. They are going to go up in price. So I would suggest, if you're trying to build decks in pretty much any format that's requiring a playset, I would get playsets of these slow lands before they shoot up more, because they will get more expensive. This is around $7, so not very budget. Kind of the same thing. This one is around, I want to say 10-ish, so not as budget friendly. This one's around 10. So these things that I would suggest adding, they are great adds. They are just, a little bit out of the price range. So, well, we want to thank you for joining us today. If you're on the lookout for cards, check out our sponsor over at Geekified. You can find them at geekifiediowa.com. So thank you all for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. So if you're not sure when that's going to be, go ahead and subscribe, hit that bell notification, and join us in our Discord. And we do lots of fun things in the Discord, so you should be in there anyway. It's a blast. We want to thank you. Hopefully this was a fun introduction to a pretty inexpensive deck for Modern. I don't know that you'll be able to go to like a GP or something and, win the prize with it. But you might be able to go to your local game store and do fairly well against some decks. Things like Char Belcher, you're not going to. That one is just a super broken deck. Like, I would not be shocked if Char Belcher itself gets banned, because they've banned other things around it to try and keep it in check, and that hasn't really helped much. But, yeah, it'll be interesting. There is a ban announcement coming up fairly soon. So just be on the lookout for that, because it is going to shake up formats. And I think just sorry about that. As I was saying before my phone died, there's going to be some ban announcements coming up. I'm guessing that things are going to be going in Modern and shaking quite a bit up. My bet would be Char Belcher itself is going to go. Kind of a broken card, and in the past they've banned things in order to try and control it. And they've basically gotten rid of most of the fast mana. There's about half of it left, but I mean, at this point, I think they should just get rid of Char Belcher itself. So we want to thank you for joining us today. If you're on the lookout for cards, check out our sponsor over at Geekified. You can find them at geekifiediowa.com. So again, thank you for joining us. If you want to know when we're meeting next and having our next video, go ahead and subscribe, hit that bell notification, and join us in our Discord, which you should do because the Discord is a fun place. So thank you again for stopping by, and we hope to see you next time. That's all we have for today, and our meeting is now adjourned. Hope you have a fantastic day.